My name's Brittany. I'm really glad to see so many of you here. It's great that people are interested in this topic. Does anyone happen to be a lawyer? Hands? All right, one lawyer. So I'm not, and that's why I wanted to give this talk today. Technology, to me, has always been about problem solving within systems. And our lives in this country are built on a justice system that has very serious problems that I want to believe a room full of problem solvers can help. Today, 2.3 million people are locked up in this country. That's the number. That's what's meant by mass incarceration. That's out of a population of 250 million adults. For context, the imprisonment rate was stable for the first 3 quarters of the 20th century, even as the population tripled. Then there was an almost 10x increase in those stable rates during the past 40 years. This can't be explained by a change in crime rates. Just getting that out of the way. 73.5 million people have some kind of criminal record in the US. This is significant because state control doesn't totally end when you're out of prison. A criminal record also does not only contain convictions. You only need to get arrested to have one. A criminal record makes a lot of things in ordinary life harder. Housing yourself or your family, getting a job, applying to school, traveling. Basically anything that requires an ID or paperwork. Which brings us here. 29.5% of the United States adult population has a criminal record. A third is much too high. Can we all agree on that? I see some nods. Yes, okay. Racism, even more than sheer massiveness, characterizes this system of mass incarceration. Do people remember stop and frisk in New York City a couple years ago? It was, so 80% of the stops were of Black and Hispanic people. This practice was visible, but not alone, in prejudice profiling by law enforcement. Its visibility is what contributed to public outcry. These are some FBI statistics from 2013. FBI is a government organization, so there's reason to believe that these are conservative estimates, but as you can see, white people are 77% of the general population, and they are arrested 69% of the arrests. In contrast, Black people are 13% of the general population and 28% of the arrests. In the prison population, this racial disparity is even starker. There are more than 5 times as many white people than there are Black people in this country, but there are more Black prisoners. What is it that's for sale in this unjust criminal legal system? I'm going to talk through 3 concrete things that you can buy during the judicial process, and after each, I'll give an example of an organization that is using technology to make justice more accessible for people who can't afford that item, because no one should have to. These are the 3 things. Freedom, whether you're in a cell or in your community. Due process, the entire legal instrument that is supposedly guaranteed to protect your rights, and your good standing in the eyes of the law and the country. These things are all interconnected, and they're often all sold at once, or leveraged against each other. I'm going to speak about them separately for clarity's sake, but just to highlight the trade-offs. Freedom is unlocked often by paying bail. Plea bargains are a bargain, a way to bypass almost everything that due process entails. And a criminal record is a permanent record, a file accessible to law enforcement and many institutions all across the nation that makes your cell virtually inescapable even after you've done your time. If you have a felony conviction in certain states, it can even mean that you lose your right to vote or to serve on a jury or to gain access to social services that you may need to live. Pretrial bail, to define it, is money set as collateral after you're arrested and charged with a crime, but before your trial. If someone else can come pay this amount for you, you can leave jail. The idea is that you'll be incentivized to return for your court date to get the money back. A judge is generally going to make a call about how high pretrial bail should be set, or if it should be set, according to a few factors such as the seriousness of your crime, alleged crime, your prior history, your age, and whatever their impression is of you. The judge only has a few minutes with you, since the court system is extremely overloaded. 500,000 people today are locked up for no reason other than they cannot get out on bail. Almost a quarter of the people locked up on a given day are legally innocent. That's what that means. They've only been arrested, and they're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. That's generally because they can't afford to get out. Many people who are kept in jail are significantly less well off than people who are released, not significantly more dangerous. It's easier to police a poor area and get people into jail in the first place, knowing that legal resistance and political backlash are going to be less well funded. It's also easier to keep people there if it's unlikely that anyone can come up with bail or afford to protest if no bail is set. 30,000 people go through this system a day, so it bears mentioning that some people are released on bail. Some people are also released with tracking software attached to them, which we'll discuss later, and others are released on their own recognizance, which means that they're trusted to come back for the trial. Here's one thing that one organization that's doing something about this. UpTrust is a company that may expand the use of recognizance release by scaling pretrial services. Those are alternatives to bail, in this case, text reminders. Studies have shown that failure to appear rates, not coming back for your court date, go way down, over 50%, if a defendant is texted before their court date. You do not need to keep someone in jail to make sure that they come back for the trial. Lots of people just need some assistance. They aren't running from responsibility. They just couldn't get off work, or they needed a ride, or they had to stay with their kids. Thank you. The presentation's not over. This is the top response. This is the top response that UpTrust reports from the people who receive their text reminders. This is extremely telling. Missing from many software solutions to problems with law enforcement are the effects that it has on the people who are swept into the system, not the people who operate it. This platform's accountability to the population that they serve, which is ordinary people, is an important part of their success, and it's measured in those thank yous. I'm going to read this tweet out loud. This is a defense attorney. My client walked out of Rikers Island today after a jury acquitted him of all charges. He waited in jail for his trial for 3 years. He lost his job and missed his son's first 3 birthdays simply because he couldn't afford bail. He is not unique. This is our system. He is not unique. This happens to tons of people, and Rikers Island is a jail, not a prison. I'll get into that in a second. Many people lose what happened to this man is tragic beyond belief. But many people lose their jobs or their place to sleep at night, depending on their housing, if they're in jail for just 1 night. So it doesn't even take 3 years to seriously disrupt a person's entire life if they have to spend some time in jail. However, spending a long time in jail is traumatizing. Prison is for people who've been sentenced and has corresponding resources like educational programs. Jail is not designed to be a long-term living environment. This is reflected in high suicide rates. Suicide is the leading cause of death in jail, in local jails, and was more than 4 times higher in detainees in jail than it was in the general population in a 2014 study. It's another tweet. In response, there are many bail projects throughout the US that raise money to bail people out. Abolition is an app that uses the spare change from debit card transactions, rounding up purchase amounts and sending the difference to bail funds. It was started by a person with an idea, and the community response to this idea was very striking. People offered help and encouragement immediately. The original poster responded. It works today like the original tweet. It went live in November of last year to the applause of a community asking questions, giving feedback, and generally super excited about it. And there's a lot to be excited about. It's raised tens of thousands of dollars, and 85% goes to the National Bailout Collective. In just the first 4 months, together with other organizations, they bailed out over 20 people. That's an incredible impact to generate from thought and follow-through in less than a year. On the other hand, there's plenty of technology that's having the opposite effect. One example can be found in the New York City criminal justice system. Due to a quirk in the court's tracking software, you cannot set a value of 0 in a field that records the bail amount on a certain form. So whenever this form is necessary, people are held for $1 when the charge would otherwise have been nothing. This is their website. It's a great organization that if you live in New York City, I would highly recommend you check out. You can't pay your own bail, so even if you have that $1 on you, you can't get out. Dollar Bail Brigade registers volunteers to go do the hours-long process of getting someone out of jail by paying their $1 bail. Takes hours, yes, or an entire day just to pay a single dollar for someone to go free. They've also collected a bunch of data, and from what they've collected, 96% of the people that are let out on bail through their efforts return for their court date, which implies that bail is not that effective or not pointless. And before you ask or wonder, no, this cannot just be fixed by a programmer. I asked them, it would require a legislative change to update this system. Plea bargaining. This is the next thing that's up for sale, your right to trial. Plea bargaining is when you're charged with a crime after arrest, you can make a deal with the prosecutor to give you a lighter sentence in exchange for your trial. This is the other great thing about Dollar Bail Brigade, and the horrifying thing about that software is that people who stay in jail until their court date, because, for example, they aren't able to pay bail, usually take a guilty plea. And there's reason to believe that many of these people who take a guilty plea are innocent. If you are interested, later you should look up an Alford plea. They let you maintain innocence officially, but still take a punishment like you're guilty. That exists. So looking at the data, more of the data that Dollar Bail Brigade has collected, 95% of their clients' trials result in either a dismissal of all charges or something that's basically the equivalent of a parking ticket, not something that'll go on your criminal record. So the way that the plea bargaining will work is something like this. Say, for example, you are caught with a small amount of drugs. If you agree to just say you're guilty and skip the whole trial thing, they'll charge you with 10 years of probation. That means you can go home, where maybe you're the only breadwinner or the one who does all the childcare, or both. But if you want to go to trial and have a jury possibly dismiss your charges, they'll threaten to unleash the RICO Act on you, which was specifically created to bring down the mafia in the 1980s and is now used on 19-year-olds to put them in jail for longer than they've been alive. This deal is incredibly hard to resist if you couldn't afford bail or didn't have it set, because maybe they'll let you go home if you say you plead guilty. And it can be incredibly damaging to not be able to go home. Maybe you can't afford a defense lawyer whose caseload isn't overflowing and who can spend as much time with you as you need to make your strongest possible defense. There is also no oversight during this process. No need for the prosecutor to prove that they have the evidence to convict you at this stage. If it's on the books, they can charge it. That's basically it, and not many people can afford to gamble on a prosecutor's bluff. The Wisconsin Supreme Court wrote this in 1877. Pleas are hardly, if at all, distinguishable in principle from a direct sale of justice. Plea bargains started to gain traction and become popular and documented because crime rates rose after the Civil War. There was even more of an increase during Prohibition as people routinely violated the 18th Amendment. Many people at this time recognized the danger of plea bargaining and thought that it might result in coercion of the innocent to plead guilty. Nevertheless, in 1969, it was unanimously declared constitutional. And that's exactly what happened. This was allowed because trials were too expensive for the increased crime rates. Who here knows who they would call if they landed in jail? You have to know the number by heart. Okay, keep your hand raised if it's a lawyer. Okay. This is an arrest support hotline called GoodCall. They operate out of New York City, and they turn your one phone call into many. The way it works is that you sign up for their app and store contacts with them. Then if you get arrested and your phone is confiscated, you can make one phone call to them, and they will get you a lawyer and contact your people so that they know where you are, can visit you, cover for you at work or with your kids, or come bail you out so you won't be alone. As with As with abolition, UpTrust, this makes paying bail and getting out a lot easier. But a huge part of the value that you get is a lawyer. Defense attorneys are very overloaded with cases, and no notification to them is automatically triggered when you're arrested. Saying, "I want a lawyer," means basically nothing. That's what your one phone call is for, and basically none of you were calling a lawyer. That's what that's supposed to be for. Getting one quickly can be the difference between being pressured into a deal that you're offered by the prosecutor and getting a fair one. This helps you. It also helps your emergency contact, who's probably very stressed out by the fact that this is happening, without having to also deal with legal logistics and delegating or covering for all of your responsibilities. And all of these tools make it less likely that you will end up with a criminal record. You can all read, but this says, criminal record is generated for law enforcement's databases. Once you're arrested, it may be updated as you move through the system. A criminal record is a brand that follows you forever. And usually, when people are agreeing to plead guilty to go home, for example, to the children they take care of and the job that they need to feed themselves, it is not really explained to them what this stamp may mean in the future. It makes future arrests more likely. It makes traffic stops more likely. It increases your contact with the police forever and then compounds it. For numbers and breakdowns on how this increases prejudicial profiling and police brutality against racial minorities, you can check out Campaign Zero. They run a website that, among other things, releases reports of long obscured crime data that they have painstakingly collected. A criminal record can also impact your representation. 6.1 million people have had their votes taken away by state felon disenfranchisement laws. This was true in 2016 during those elections. So ex-felons often can't serve on juries or vote. And so if you think that any of this is unfair, that will matter a lot less if you can't vote or affect trial outcomes. In Florida, where a felony conviction can result from stealing a phone or a watch, over 10% of the population cannot vote. Over 20% of the black adults in Florida cannot vote, and it is a swing state. What's even scarier is that while prisoners can't vote, they still count towards representation. But they are counted in the populations of the areas where they're imprisoned, not the place that they call home. This means that when someone is sent to prison, voting power is lessened in the community they've been taken from and greater in the one they've been moved to. This is true despite the fact that prisoners are usually transplanted to that jurisdiction, the prisoner's own preferences are never solicited, and free people living in areas that house large prison populations usually have financial incentives invested in the prison. This echoes the pre-Civil War practice of slave owners casting votes equal to 3/5 the vote total of their slaves in addition to their own. In principle, this is what is happening in mostly white rural areas where most prisons are located. ClearMyRecord. To the extent that the undue burden and injustice of criminal records is officially recognized, there exist processes to apply for conviction relief, to clear people's records for certain types of charges. ClearMyRecord was developed by Code for America to automate record clearance as much as possible with guidance from their clients. It's a website that accepts applications for conviction relief, which it estimated 5 million Californians are eligible for. They've served over 6,000 Californians to date, and the number's climbing, which is great because it's a long way to go to 5 million. Where people are failing, it is not for a lack of individual efforts on the part of clients and attorneys, but because the system in which they are operating is exceedingly difficult to navigate. This is from ClearMyRecord's latest report this May. Their report mentioned that many CMR clients said that they did not receive clear explanations about their pleas when they were convicted. They didn't know that it might mean that they would lose their public housing or food stamps. And the processes to get back their good standing are complicated, poorly communicated, can take years of wrong turns and red tape to cut through, and you guessed it, it costs thousands of dollars in lawyer fees. All of these organizations solicit feedback from users. They're publicly accountable. In the case of GoodCall, it was developed through Blue Ridge Labs, a civic tech incubator that emphasizes on-the-ground user research. UpTrust records and reports the responses from the people they're texting. They're even conscious of their users' suspicions about giving out their phone number for contact information. Abolition, born on Twitter, where people immediately raise their questions. The OP was, answering back. Questions, feedback, and support. And ClearMyRecord was developed through Code for America, whose mission statement includes connecting people inside and outside of government. This is the upshot, the main takeaway. People are fighting against this. They're using the most advanced tools available to help and connect people. But there are other technologies that have contributed to the current state of the system and new uses that are looming. In particular, artificial intelligence and machine learning, relatively new fields compared to telephones and money wiring, have been operating behind the scenes, untested and invisible, helping the system absorb more and more people. This has to stop or be changed if we want the world tomorrow to be better than it is today. So sorry. All right, predictive analytics are tools that use algorithms to make predictions about future crime, drawing their results from analysis of past and current law enforcement data. When they're used by courts, they are called risk assessment tools. The purpose of using them is to gain efficiency and cut costs by letting go detainees that the tool claims are low risk, saving judges time. The tools for police use are called predictive policing algorithms and are also meant to gain efficiency and cut costs. They operate by directing police resources to only high crime areas instead of wasting them on low crime areas. But as we've seen, the data that goes into the algorithms is biased and incomplete. Part of what makes a high crime area high crime is the targeted policing that's done there. And this is true of high-risk individuals as well. Involvement in the system begets involvement in the system. That's all. Historically, there's also been very little public data available on these tools to be able to prove that that's true. Today, that's starting to change. Again, you can refer to Campaign Zero's data, many independent collectors of data. It's a good thing. In the case, machine learning algorithms of the kind predictive policing software relies upon are designed to learn and reproduce patterns in the data they're given, regardless of whether the data represents what the model's creators believe or intend. In the case of Predpol, which is a tool that's been in use for years, they claim that it's supposed to eliminate bias because a human isn't making the decisions. In fact, the tool does the opposite, compounding bias because that's all the algorithm can do, compound and repeat and magnify. Even though Predpol has released its algorithm publicly and uses only 3 input parameters, time, place, and type of crime, it still reproduces prejudiced policing patterns. It targets areas for drug enforcement where a high percentage of the population is black much more than it targets an area with similar estimated levels of drug use, but where most of the population is white. The drug use data that I'm referring to comes from public health surveys where people have very little incentive to lie. And actually, well, never mind, I'll get into that later. And then, of course, the data collected from those areas directs police to continue policing those areas and ignoring others. Thus, the crime data they are working from is just policing data. It's very incomplete, remains incomplete, and is compounded by the heavy bias that originally characterized the arrest data that went into them in the first place. On the court side, tools like Compass and the public safety assessment, which were on that list I had up earlier, work by bucketing people into low, medium, or high risk of reoffending. The idea is that the low risk bucket will be released on their own recognizance. But which numbers go into which buckets is not regulated. This actually happened with ICE under the Trump administration. They set the risk assessment tools to put everyone crossing the border into a high risk bucket, which results in automatic detention. So judges are not required to follow the guidelines of these tools, but that is not necessarily a good thing. First of all, it's difficult to collect data on the effectiveness or fairness of a tool if it's not used in a consistent way. Second, judges' humanity may prevent obviously draconian sentences that are prescribed by the tools, but like all humans, they carry bias from long careers in the system. They may be influenced by the policies of the times, or use the tools as a crutch against accountability. Without good data, without accountability, it is very hard to know. This is also why it's important to resist the temptation to be hopeful about the new Senate Bill 10. Do people know what that is? Okay, Senate Bill 10 is a California legislation that's banning bail by 2019, October 2019, and replacing it with algorithms. However, there's nothing in the new legislation to regulate how exactly the algorithms are going to bucket. Everyone could go into the high-risk category at the discretion of law enforcement. Now we'll talk about an example of unfair bias in these algorithms, even when they aren't set to max. I'll describe a widely reported on study done by ProPublica on the Compass tool, one of the courtside tools, and it's used in several jurisdictions to help judges predict which people will reoffend within 2 years. This is a single study result, so take it with a grain of salt, but it illustrates the kind of dangerous precedent that we're setting today with numbers. This was a study done in Broward County in Florida. The company that made the tool that produced these results was called Northpoint, and they rebranded to Equivant at some point after the media fallout from this, but you still know. Okay. Between 60 and 70% accuracy overall predicting whether someone's going to commit a crime or not is not good. Imagine if every time you went to the hospital, there was a 40% chance that the doctor was going to make a serious mistake. What's even worse is that this tool shows a racial bias when it's incorrect. It gives white defendants the benefit of the doubt, false negatives, at high rates, similar to the rates at which it misjudges black defendants as more likely to commit future crimes than they actually are. Researchers took that data on the Compass study and compared it with untrained humans that they found through an online survey. What's so funny? These tools did not do better at predicting reoffense, or didn't do much better at predicting reoffense than random individuals. Crowd-based pooling techniques using the internet randos actually yielded a 67% accuracy, which may not determine if there's wisdom in the crowd, which was one of their goals, but at least there is as much wisdom in the crowd as there is in these tools. Arguments have been made to excuse the tool's bias, that it's not possible to maximize accuracy and control for false negatives and false positives, and that there are many different academic measurements of fairness. But these numbers speak for themselves, and there is absolutely no excuse. The data that goes into the tools was collected by biased humans, garbage in, so the algorithms reproduce that, garbage out. It's been said that it is human to error, but to err millions of times in a second, you need a computer. At their best, At their best, it seems like these tools can maybe guide conditions of probation, for example, mandating a breathalyzer device on someone's steering wheel if they have a DUI, but not how long or whether someone should be in prison. That is way too risky. It's easy, so I'm just an engineer. I'll repeat this in a second. It's easy to get caught up in cool implementations, but it is very important to take a wider stance. At the first Artificial Intelligence, Ethics, and Society conference this February, a paper was presented that proposes automating classification of gang-related crime. A junior co-author of that paper was asked about the ethical implications of that research. This was his response: "I'm just an engineer." Are you just an engineer? This is not to call out this individual, but to illustrate a pervasive and disappointing attitude towards engineering. If we really abdicate responsibility for the systems that we help build, we are contributing to everything that I've been describing. The future will be just like the past and the present. New York City is preparing to unveil a new task force on automated decision systems in the next few months. The public transit director in San Francisco wanted to explore facial recognition technology in the underground as recently as last month. But there's so much proven bias in these systems. The data is wrong. It's not just incorrect, it's not just incomplete, it's unjust. If we ignore how deeply this is built into the concrete and stones that make up our cities by the biases of yesterday, the world will never get better. This is how the school-to-prison pipeline works. It funnels kids from extremely harsh schools full of metal detectors and police officers into courthouses and jails. This is in Cobb Hill in New York City. It's in Brooklyn. The school serves a student population that's 78% black, 19% Hispanic, 2% white. 50% of the students have disabilities. 91% participate in a free lunch program. What you cannot see in these statistics or on that map is that that 2-block area is completely swarmed by police cars. They're in every street. They're parked all around. There's also a huge line. You can see the courthouse and the school share a wall. I hope you can see that. Across the street is the detention center with a huge line outside of it. This normalizes incarceration for these kids. And it's just one more efficiency in a system that routinely trades people's lives for money wherever it can. So why do we use these algorithms at all? Okay, well, unsurprisingly, the answer is money. The system already costs American taxpayers $182 billion per year, and it's getting bigger. Instead of deciding that the system is completely broken, we've gone with a more cost-effective way to keep it churning, and these algorithms are one way to do it. This is similar to how plea bargaining was accepted because it let more people get through the system without crashing it. We've decided to let the criminal legal system grow. Its practices, policies, and customs bleeding freely out into other parts of the population, like schools and like people's homes. Speaking of homes, we're going to talk about electronic ankle monitors for a second. This is the original design of the electronic ankle monitor. It's a way to extend prison into the home. I mentioned earlier that some people are released from imprisonment with a tracking device on them. Electronic monitoring was intended as a cheaper and less destructive alternative to incarceration pretrial, or in some cases, probation or parole. So you can see all these. The design philosophy focused on the possibility of establishing a community-based network that would encourage members to share the responsibility of monitoring and giving encouragement to other members. You can see these little labeled boxes are the different members, and they're all connected centrally. It was supposed to be what they call Bluetooth AA, where people could communicate with one another through an interface on the device. But that's not what happened. It may look good on paper, but attempts to justify it fail completely in the faces of the people who have actually worn them. Ankle monitors have severe psychological effects. There's some people who've worn them. It's hard to imagine wearing it for 30 more years. It's depressing and upsetting to imagine having that much of my life monitored. It feels like a rope around my neck. I can't get my feet back on the ground. You just think about the opportunity of being home with the people who care about you, but it was horrible, a living nightmare. Several states allow lifetime supervision under the ankle monitor. We are in one of them right now. If you live in one of those, like Sarah, there are a lot of things you can never do again. The ankle monitors are only water resistant, so you can't go swimming ever again. And taking a shower is going to be a little challenging. Sometimes they need to be charged every 4 hours. That means that you may have to get up in the middle of the night to recharge it instead of getting a good night's sleep. And it's going to take a lot of jobs off the table. Anything where you have to be on your feet or active is going to be a challenge. And all the while, these things are costing people. I mentioned that it's less costly for the system. One of the ways that this is achieved is by making the people who wear them pay for them. A person who is waiting for their trial or on probation or parole, trying to get housing and a job, live a normal life, may have to pay the manufacturer between $5 and $25 a day to cover the costs. This is a win for the system, but not for anyone sucked into it. This person on the right, William, was not even convicted. He had to exist in what he called a living nightmare as a completely innocent person, innocent of all charges. So people may think that any alternative to incarceration is a good thing, but if that alternative ends up being even more widespread, applied freely without any research on the psychological effects of these things, it can be equally punitive. Nevertheless, electronic monitoring use increases. Not because there are studies showing that it's a fair alternative to pretrial incarceration or that there's any reasonable calculation to translate a prison sentence into an ankle monitor sentence. It's increasing because the technology exists and there's a market for it. One very large producer of these devices is a company called BI Incorporated, part of the very descriptive GEO group. They made radio frequency cattle tracking tags and saw a business opportunity to expand their operation into human beings. As you can see, there's been a shift away from RF radio frequency monitoring to GPS monitoring. It used to be that you'd have the thing in your home and then a thing on your ankle, and if you move too far away, there's an alert. Now, it's changing to mostly GPS monitoring. This changes the nature of it. While it may enable more freedom of movement, the surveillance is much more invasive. It can't only tell if you're in a specific area. It can tell exactly where you are, anywhere. It's hard to know exactly where it went wrong, but it seems like the original creators weren't attached to anyone in particular. They patented this idea, they implemented it, and then the people to popularize it were people who could make money off of it. That was a group of people who were unlike the people that the tools were wielded against and indifferent to the suffering that it causes. It's a similar story with weaponry. This is what it means to give enhanced technology to law enforcement. Tanks, bazookas, and millions of dollars in military equipment is given out through federal grants to local police departments every year. This particular vehicle, as you can see, belongs to state police. What do they need a tank for? Maybe this is just for show, or maybe it's just for show for now. And here is the most harrowing financial incentive of incarceration. Slavery is still constitutional. This is the text of the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The express purpose of the Constitution, as stated by James Madison, one of the original framers, was to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority, for the sake of government stability. In federal prisons, some kind of work is mandated. People are paid cents an hour, next to nothing, to do factory labor for companies like Unicor, especially Unicor, which makes a ton of military equipment and is run by the Bureau of Prisons. It's not a public company. This is what prisons are for. This country wasn't just built on centuries of labor by captured, abused, and unpaid people. It still is. So truth, complete data, and human connection makes it harder to generate financial incentives when it comes to companies that create predatory, pain-deaf technology. It's harder to continue an unjust practice when everyone can see, like with stop and frisk. As a quick example, toll-free lines are not free in jails. This doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize that suicide hotlines, which are usually toll-free, are not toll-free in a prison or jail. Phone companies that serve prisons can just charge whatever they want, basically with impunity. And this all happens invisibly with only people who are directly interacting with the system of incarceration incurring the costs. This is a poster from the prison strike last month. It was extremely difficult for reporters to get information during the strike. It's hard to get the truth about what's going on inside unless you go inside. So one way to be helpful, actually the last talk said it very well, give your skills. One way to be helpful is to spread your knowledge, both inside and out. Education about computers and data, like other types of education, contributes to wealth inequality and abuses of justice because it's not distributed equally. Without education, which often translates into money and power, people can become vulnerable to abuses of the system. These are two organizations that help connect technologists to justice-involved students who want to learn. The Code Cooperative operates a lot like a boot camp and works with formerly incarcerated people in New York. And the Last Mile has technologists go into a prison to teach concepts to people who are serving time. That's in California. You can help people get good jobs, mind work jobs, so that they have more power over their own lives when so much has been taken from them. And at the same time, you can learn about the reality of prisons and prisoners and help our entire country. You can communicate what you learn to friends, coworkers, strangers, and legislators. You can use this hotline, which will ask for your zip code and then connect you to all your representatives, one after another. Put this in your phone. I always hear people saying to call your representatives, and this hotline makes it extremely easy. You can contribute to it too, since it's an open source project created in June of 2016. It's affiliated with StayWoke.org, an organization that develops multiple open source tools that you can also check out. The link doesn't really help you, but you can search GitHub or call Congress, StayWoke.org. Everybody got the phone number? Great. Okay, here's a list of organizations that you can investigate in your own time. There are so many other individual projects, books, court watches, town halls, efforts local to different cities. People have even mined cryptocurrency to raise money for bail funds, which is cool because crypto so far has seemed to disproportionately benefit the extremely wealthy. You can check out Bail Block by The New Inquiry later if you're interested in that. Technology is a part of the system. It's not going away. We've seen how it goes wrong, and it goes wrong when creators don't care or aren't aware of how their tools affect people's lives, because it doesn't seem to affect their lives. These are the two options. Technology can magnify existing problems, or it can help change course. The criminal legal system is not closed. There are no closed systems in software. When we build, we have a responsibility to seek out those hard-to-hear stories and understand the context of the data that often drives software decision-making. No one person can observe a system perfectly, and the people who've suffered from bad designs need to be involved first in developing solutions. Everyone in this room cares. You were drawn to this presentation instead of the other options that were available. So I really hope that you talk to each other. I hope that you share ideas and perspectives, and I hope that you help the world and help the country. And that's a book list. Those are all great books. That's all I have for now. I don't actually know how I'm doing on time. Probably bad. Yeah, pretty bad. Okay, you can see me after if you have questions.